Welcome, everyone, officially to a Cartoonist's Rise and Fall in Publishing, a special business sermon today with New Yorker cartoonist Bob Eckstein. Before we get underway, I just want to give a shout out to this month's sponsor. This month's sponsor is Readsy, a company that many writers are already very familiar with. They've been around for more than a decade. They're a marketplace for you to find professional help for your book, editors, designers, marketers, and more at readsy.com. They have a very special event coming up on June 12th. That's on Wednesday of next week at 12 p.m. Pacific or 3 p.m. Eastern. They're running Pitch Wars, which is a way to get your book pitch critiqued by professionals. So you can register using this special link on the screen. Just take a picture of the QR code, or you can type that link into your browser and submit your pitch and then show up for the live event. Thank you to Readsy. For those who subscribe to my free newsletter, Electric Speed, you will see this again with a clickable link on Saturday morning on June 8th. Now, allow me to formally introduce today's guest, Bob Eckstein. I first met Bob when he was at the Writer's Digest annual conference. This was in 2019, pre-pandemic times. I first became more intensely aware of his work when he started cartooning during that conference. I think it's the first conference he did that. It was 2018. I'll have a link to that in the chat later if you want to see the series that he did, which was remarkable and charming and full of lots of writing and publishing truths. He's been a contributor to The New Yorker since 2007. He is a New York Times bestselling author. He has a Substack called The Bob, where he offers free and paid subscriptions. It's a lot of fun, a lot of funnies in that newsletter. He's taught at NYU, the Pratt Institute, the School of Visual Arts, and he is the world's leading snowman expert. That was his first book, and he'll be talking a little bit about that today. And his latest book is Footnotes from the Most Fascinating Museums. So I'm going to turn things over to Bob now.
Just wanted to say that when we met, that's when I started getting really into writing and learning because of your workshops.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Really learned a lot, and I'm still learning from everything I was taught those years ago. And I don't think there's anyone who has been to more workshops than myself, because I not only draw the different workshops, but I have to hop around to go to each of the different ones. And whatever I miss, I watch later in recording. And so I watch them over and over. And I've been like soaking it in, and I've been getting like a master class in how to do books properly from you and from other people who I'm indebted to that have been helping me. So I'm going to show a bunch of cartoons and share some stories, and we could all talk over them as well. But I just thought it would be fun to see stuff while we're talking as well and explain some of the stuff better. So like Jane said, you might be familiar with some of my work. This is actually a cartoon that's gone viral, and too many of us have gone through this sort of thing. But let me start with how I got started. And I'll read the caption in case some people can't see it. What do you mean you're leaving the farm to write romance fantasy? I grew up in the South Bronx in New York City when I was very young. I learned how to draw and paint by painting little plastic army men. And that's where I got my skills. I would paint hockey uniforms on military army men. And I don't know if there's any editorial comment on that as well, but that's how I kind of got my hand and eye coordination. I went to Holy Cross when I grew up Catholic. Three people who were very important to my life would be Santa Claus, Jesus Christ, and my dad. I couldn't fit my dad in this rowboat, so but religion did play a big role in my growing up, and a lot of my cartoons have a religious theme. I actually worked for America Magazine for years, and that's like the largest Catholic magazine in the world. I did have a job once when I was a teenager, I worked at a golf course, and I was the person who was to set people off in the morning, the groups that go out to play. And I had to get up at like 5 a.m. And the boss came rushing down from the clubhouse in a golf cart and was yelling at me and accused me of being on drugs. I was making the crowd of people who were waiting to tee off laugh. I was just having fun and conversing, and the whole place was laughing and listening to me. And this boss fired me in front of everyone. And I made up my mind that I would never have a real job after that. And I haven't. I've always worked for myself ever since. I didn't quite finish high school. I was sneaking in college, which you could do. People don't take attendance of people who are not supposed to be there. And so I was sitting in on classes while I was supposed to be going to high school. And I also was taught tennis by a friend of mine. And that was very instrumental in my life because I played very hard. I learned and practiced as much as I could. And I was offered some tennis scholarships to go to college. And I went to Pratt Institute on a tennis scholarship without finishing high school. And it was there that, like many people, we all have an enemy in college. And I had an enemy as well. A person who, well, me and this person really butted heads and did not like each other. But we did meet up again 12 years later. And it wasn't at a class reunion, but it was actually at a funeral that we ran into each other. And at that time we met again, and it was like, well, this might as well happen. And we eloped. We got married here at Reykjavik. This is off the coast of Iceland. This is where we got married. And we sent postcards back to our family, to their shock, not just because they didn't know that we were going to get married, but because Tammy is Jewish, I'm Catholic. And that went over really well with the family, as you can imagine. But my wife has been a tremendous guiding force in my career. I had been writing at that time when we got married. I was writing for magazines like Spy and National Lampoon and Playboy. I was writing a column for the Village Voice and New York Newsday, but I never thought about doing a book. And she convinced me that I should think bigger, that she had confidence in me, and that I should look for something that I'm passionate about and write it. And I'm passionate at that time about two things in particular. I was obsessed with snow, and I also was a huge fan of Sherlock Holmes and mystery. And it's easy for me to complain and look at the negative, but I'm trying not to, and I try not to with my books. With my books, I try to put a positive spin on things. And when I decided I was going to try to do my first book, I decided that the mystery would not be a crime, but it would be something more pleasant. So, as you might have heard me say this before, instead of doing, who killed somebody, I try to do who wrote the first joke, or who made the first sandwich. And in this case, I decided on who made the first snowman. And I decided that partly on going to a bookstore and going around the whole store and deciding what was it that I would want to read that was not there. And it happened to be during the holidays that I realized that for a Catholic like myself, there's all these Christmas books, but there really wasn't anything for non-denominational people who celebrated Christmas as a holiday in general, aside from cookbooks. So that's when I came up with the idea of doing the Snowman book. And the first thing I did was try to decide if there was a book there. Was there enough material? And then I would have to decide on what do I do with the book? How do I get an agent or an editor? I had been approached during my time writing columns at different publications, agents who wanted to represent me or editors wanted to do something, but I really didn't know them and I really didn't know how to proceed. It kind of scared me. But ultimately, a friend recommended their agent. And then I felt like I was in more comfortable ground. And so I arranged to meet with this one agent. And I'm going to share a life lesson that I got from this lunch, which is that I handed this agent my business card. I always felt that it was more important just to have that business card. It makes it more real. And one of the best lessons I got from anyone was a TV producer that we happen to know, who said, the main thing is to become an expert. Even if you're not an expert, call yourself an expert. Thus, the card. And I gave the card to this agent when we sat down, and she says, I'll take you on. Without hearing the story about the book or anything, she just felt my approach to doing things was something that she wanted to be a part of. And then from there, she crafted with me a proposal that we would pass along. And the book did go to auction. And I immediately started my quest of who made the first snowman. And this took about 7 years to get all the research together and getting together a dream team of experts. That's another lesson I learned, was to surround myself with experts. So I had professors of cultural history and art historians working on the book with me. And back then, I was always thinking in terms of marketing and how to brand myself. And I want to share quickly a story in which, when I met the person who was the chief editor of Simon Schuster, the publishing house that purchased the book, we were to meet at a restaurant. And it was during winter time. And I went to the restaurant early, and I made all these snowmen outside the restaurant so that when he showed up, a crowd of snowmen would be greeting him. I was all set and went in the restaurant, all happy with myself, knowing that the restaurant even helped me by providing carrots for all the noses. And the editor came in and didn't say anything, and we got straight into business and didn't make one mention of the snowmen. And I learned that the snowmen had caused such a ruckus outside of the restaurant that there were people surrounding all the snowmen, and no one could see the snowmen. So he walked by and he didn't notice there was all these snowmen. But this is one of the stories as I learned my lessons through publishing. I'm just going to go through this very quickly. This is some of the places that are included in the Snowman book. And I did find some amazing stories, such as the massacre of 1690 and the miracle of 1511. These stories where the foundation is around sex and violence and these things you would never realize had to do with the snowman. This is the world's largest snowman at 12 stories high. And so anyway, this project actually led to other things that I couldn't possibly have imagined. One is that I have a museum of snowman artifacts of over 800 items. I would say it's the best collection in the world. But the other thing is it opened up the door to other opportunities. And I'll explain that in a moment. I'm just going to share first. This is my living room. I had to put everything in storage because after a while, it was impossible to go anywhere without being trampled on by snowmen. The first book did well enough that I spent money making a proper book. I took the first book, went to another publisher after I purchased the rights to it. And there was supposed to be a second book by Simon Schuster. It never happened because the people I work with all left. And so that kind of like fell through. So I went to a different publisher and they did the book properly, sparing no expense for photographs and illustrations. And it's a beautiful, lush coffee table book, exactly the way I had hoped to do it initially. And I'm very proud of that. So the first book, though, I went through 8 editors. What I learned was that once one person leaves, no one really wants to adopt a book that's floating out there because editors really want to find you. They don't want to have you forced on them. Editors want to put it on their resume, and maybe I'm maybe I'm generalizing too much, and Jane, you could correct me, but I think that editors want to say that they found their own people and they want to have someone that they go and grow with and they nurture and they say it's all theirs. So when I got started having people drop out of my book, they started dropping out with more and more frequency, where people would only then be around for 1 week before they decided it wasn't their project. The book was already getting close to being shaped and formed the way I wanted, and they weren't going to have much of a voice. So that was one thing. And the second book was canceled. I was supposed to do a children's book of that, but there was such a shakeup at the publishing house. I just had to roll with the punches. There was a time in which I had a few days of a TV crew living in my apartment, and I was feeding them and taking care of them. This was CBS Sunday Morning. And Charles, what's his name? Charles, what's the host that retired? I'm trying to think of his name. Starts with a G. Oh, I want to say not Charles. Yeah, but he was here. He had loved the layout I had of bagels and lox, and I treated him all so well. And ultimately, the Iran war bumped me, and then they never did run my segment of the book, which was sad because those are the moments that really could help with a book. I was on Good Morning America on Christmas morning. And anyway, this was actually a cartoon for Jane. I love doing the cartoons for Jane because I love pontificating about publishing. I love talking about the woes of it. And here's a secret, is not a secret at all. Everyone I know is miserable. I happen to know one of the biggest names in publishing, and she's miserable. I mean, if she's miserable, what hope does any of us have? I really wonder if anyone could truly be happy, because once you get to a certain stratosphere, there's still someone always above you. And people, I extend nature to feel like they have to compete or whatever. I like to think that I've learned that it's not about that. I know Jane has mentioned this in her workshops. At some point, I remember learning from her, there's enough room for everyone. There's no reason to feel like there isn't. You know, you can help everyone, and it's okay. So one weird part about the book was that I got a chance to meet the New Yorker people because I decided I needed intermission in the book. And I collected cartoons from the New Yorker magazine, which I really didn't have any connection with before. I wasn't doing cartoons or anything, but I purchased cartoons and I got to meet the cartoonist. And I was friends with somebody. I became friends with Sam Gross, who took me out for my birthday years later at the New Yorker lunch that everyone goes to, that famous lunch. And on a dare, he said, I'd like you to try doing cartoons. I did do a couple of cartoons for the Snowman book, only because I ran out of money, but that was the extent of it. I didn't think I never thought about that. But Sam Gross brought me into the New Yorker, and he introduced me to the cartoon editor. This was the first cartoon I tried doing, and they purchased it. It was the first cartoon that I had done. I didn't know how it worked, so I didn't know it was a big deal because we were in a room of people, like 10 people, and I assumed that everyone there sold multiple cartoons, and I was embarrassed because I only sold one. But I did fall in love with doing cartooning. I really like doing cartooning. I miss it very much. I'm heartbroken that everything has changed everywhere, and that includes the New Yorker, where the New Yorker has a different cartoon editor, and on top of it, Mad Magazine, Barron's, Playboy, and a whole list of magazines all folded at the same time. And I used to do my work for them, and like really miss that. As I stopped doing so many cartoons, I was thinking about my next book, and I was very concerned about bookstores, the bookstores that are endangered. So I came up with this book that was going to shine a light on bookstores and explain to people how they were our intellectual hub at our main street and how important they were to each community and how hard they work to fight online shopping. And that was a very rewarding project that led to the book being printed in multiple languages. This is actually Korean. I'll actually be teaching in Korea later this year. I've been teaching in Korea on and off for the last few years. As I cut back in my teaching, it's the one place I'm going to continue because it's so exotic, and I feel like, I get really appreciated there. There's actually a class about my work in Korea. How can you say no to that? So, and I'm highlighting this one piece because I wanted to share that this is a bookstore in Alabama called the Booksmith. And what's unique about this bookstore is they don't put the book's spine out, but they let you see the cover. They let you see the whole cover of the book. And they've been great to me. They've championed me. They buy my books and really support me. And I love doing book covers. It's another lesson I learned was you have to multitask. That's actually the first lesson I learned from the workshops, going back to the Writer's Digest conference. And it was Jane's workshop in particular. I remember hearing her say that it would take a combination of skills from your toolbox to cobble out a salary. And I've done that. I've listened to that advice, and I've taught and I speak and I do all sorts of different things so I can continue doing the books.
Now, you mentioned to me, Bob, that the bookstore book has been your most successful sales-wise.
Yeah, what's interesting is that if you take like about 6 or 7 of my lower selling books, they wouldn't even total the amount of sales for the bookstore book. And actually, the biggest selling thing I've ever done is not even a book, but it's the postcards from that book. The postcards is a very popular thing with college students. They love to decorate their dorms with those postcards, and postcards are kind of making a comeback.
And so
but during my time,
sorry. I just wanted to ask about the postcard book. So is that just, it's sold like a book in a store where you just tear off the postcards from like out of it?
No,
Does that?
it comes in a box. It comes in a box set.
Okay. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, it comes in a box set, and I'll probably be doing something similar for the museum book because people are already asking about it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a demand for it. And I kind of like the idea of people writing instead of texting. I think it's kind of neat that might make a comeback. But anyway, during the 2 years I was working on the bookstore book, I learned all about bookstore owners. I learned about marketing. I learned about their challenges. I started feeling a whole emotional investment into this whole world, and I got more involved. And I'm going to show one example of marketing. This is the poster we made of all the different bookstores. And so let me go back to mistakes. One of the mistakes I've done is oversharing. And that is when you write emails, I learned in this business, you have to assume that everyone's going to see that email. And it can be seen by anyone. That's one of my lessons when I was new and I was for the first time doing my book, I would say, oh, I don't understand why the editor's making me do this. Oh, how come we're doing this cover? Oh, how come I haven't been getting this done? Like I'm not getting on Terry Gross. Isn't that easy to get onto? So I learned that all these emails and stuff, somehow or another, everyone it's very transparent. So I learned how to be professionally appropriate. And I learned by meeting everyone how to conduct myself and going forward. Another lesson I learned was undersharing. I just learned this lesson recently. When I submit like a piece for a submission for something, the subject line should not just say submission, or just say desperate or help. It should be exactly what the idea is, like encapsulated, if you can, in a few words like most amazing museums, perfect summertime reading, or something like that. because that's what I'm competing with all the other submissions. And if these people are getting hundreds of submissions, if they say something dopey like introduction in the subject line, they're going to pass you over to someone they know with something that sounds interesting. If the Bronte sisters wrote science fiction, this is a good cartoon to represent one of a lesson I learned, which is to stay in my lane. And I think that for my own sanity, I have to learn that I'm doing the best I can in my lane. I do what I do. And if I can compare myself constantly to friends or people who are doing extremely well and they have a lap pool in their living room and an oval driveway, I'm going to get discouraged. And I have to stop comparing myself, but instead just say, am I going the way I want to go? Am I progressing? And staying in my lane, saying that I am growing at the rate that I can grow, and not to put so much pressure on myself. You know, pressure is the opposite of being creative. You can't be, let's say, funny or write well if you constantly have a cloud of anxiety over you and have this pressure to think that I have to meet these expectations. This book has to be a bestseller, or whatever it may be that your goals are, instead of just thinking of terms of doing what you're doing at the moment, you're doing the best you can do. Jane, would you agree with that sort of
110%, yes.
Okay, thank you. Another lesson I learned is you can't do this alone. I'm learning that it's important to have a community around me, to have a platform, to have people helping you. A lesson I've learned is to make this a team thing. You have to make people around you feel like part of the team too. When I converse with my editors or my publicists or whatever, I always say it's our book. It's not my book. It's all our book. As a matter of fact, my museum book is not even our book. It's the museum's books too. It's all the people who contributed. It took all the people who helped me by providing fun stories, and the museums gave me access. They not only gave me access to museums, they inspired me. I would visit all these different museums and I would go away. I couldn't wait to get working on the book. It's an enormous team effort. There's no such thing as a sure thing. I think there was at a time everyone thought if you just had cats in your book, you're good to go. That was one lesson. This book was actually just written for fun anyway, because I wanted everyone to participate. And I had all these friends and people sending me list of cat names. And it was a lot of fun to pass the time during COVID. But this is the latest book. And the way I see museums is they're really a giant selfie of everything we've done on this planet and reassessing it. And it's so exciting now for me to go in museums. It didn't always begin that way. It's something that I grew to love. I acquired a love for it. And I think anyone else would go through the same experience. If you go to enough museums, you start to appreciate how it's so many people's life work that you're seeing and how important that is. I'm going to quickly just share a couple of fun pictures from this museum book. This is up at the Sleeper McCain House up by Gloucester, up in Massachusetts. It's north of Boston. And what I typically do is I try to go to multiple museums in a day. I went to a lot, and I had to cut down 150 museums down to 75. So that meant there were days I went to 3 museums in one day. And I would take photographs and sketch, take reference. This museum in particular, I'm going to share because it inspired me not only for the book, but it inspired me for my workspace, which I'm going to share with you in a moment. But this is an illustration of that museum. And you can see what I do is I idealize it. I try to make it romantic. I try to bring out its best qualities. And in this case, I shared a story about how the person who designed this house and lived in it, on one hand, he had a crush on the senator who lived on one side of him, And he had an ongoing feud with his other neighbor on the other side, who was building a spite wall higher and higher. So he wouldn't have to look at this amazing house that kept on growing and growing and sort of growing closer and closer to the other person's property. And this is from the other photograph. It's an example of how I would simplify something and just find its essence and beauty in its most simplest form. The interior of the house was filled with these secret passages and all these different quirks. And this is my house. And my house now has all these secret passages. The secret door opens up to upstairs office, which has been featured in some magazines and on TV as well. And it was selected one of the top 10 coolest offices in the world. I did the style of low tide because I was going to write a book, an 1850 diary about being a stowaway at sea. And what it really is procrastination, because I spent more time working on the office and getting all worked up about how it was going to look than actually getting to work on things. So
Now, Bob, I have to ask, are you handy? Like, were you able to make these customizations yourself, or did you
I
have
did.
help?
No, I did a lot of this myself. And in this house, I did the plumbing and electricity. And the upstairs dormer, this was an attic. And I converted it into this office, but I liked making things out of other things. So like this was a bookcase I turned into a daybed. And this thing on the left, this sort of structure here, that's a latch that opens up and that goes into another secret passage to another part of the house. There's like 3 secret passages in the house. They go from one place to the other. But people know that I had this room, so they sent me these different gauges and stuff. And different people sent me all these little gifts and stuff. So it was really nice. It was very sweet. And I do love the space. And I think it's fun if you could wrap your project around something like that and you get motivated from this world that you create and you just throw yourself into the world. Because in my book, it takes place on a ship. So I was trying to recreate like a sort of a captain's quarters.
Oh, another question I had about the museum book. If you visited 150 places, there must have been some expense involved in that. Did the publisher give you any sort of travel budget?
No, I didn't visit every museum. In some
Okay.
cases, the museums were museums I had been to before I started the
Oh,
project. For instance, I didn't go back to the Museum of Natural History. I knew it like the back of my hand before we started the project. I've been going there since I was a kid. And that's the case for a lot of museums. But in some cases, I did fly out to LA, I flew out to Chicago, and I went to different parts all over the place. And I went to as many museums as I could. And in the case of expenses, well, one road trip that I did through New England, I actually crashed out at my agent's house.
very
So
nice.
she put me up, and then I asked other friends if they would put me up. So I did a little bit of couch surfing. The advance for the book was not large at all, but I did feel it was important. I knew I was going to have fun. So for selfish reasons, I wanted to do this book, but I also was reading about how museums were doing poorly during COVID and that people were not going back. And I feel like it was being taken for granted that we have all these great institutions. And as I used the metaphor before, it's like a giant selfie. It is us. And people don't realize too that the museums have changed quite a bit. Now they have a lot of they've updated everything. The state of the art, they evolved too. You could go to a museum and return 5 years later, and it's a much different experience because they've done so many different things. Um, I showed the bee cartoon a moment ago because everything that's happened to me has been by accident, really has. And I think with bees, that was actually something that happened. And it's funny when it happens to someone else, not yourself. But this story that took place at the Columbus Art Museum had to do with bees. They had an art installation that involved live bees, and the live bees got loose, and they had to close the museum. And it's really an interesting story how the artist felt bad, so they came back later with lollipops that were honey, and those dripped all over the place and made a mess. But I want to show how important words are when it marries with a visual. Here's the piece, and to me, it's not doing anything. It doesn't come to life until I do add the words. And that's what I love doing is combine the two things. As a matter of fact, I often consider my artwork just simply background music. And I'm to just present the best stage I can for the stories. Now, I'm also adding this museum to share a story that's an inside story, an unpleasant one, tell you never things that don't always go as planned. While a lot of museums love their inclusion in the book, this museum wrote me and asked me to stop the presses and not to print this story. I gave them an advance copy, and they did not like the story that was chosen, even though it came from one of the curators. And they're actually upset with me. There's a couple of museums that are upset with me. I don't know if I should go into some of the stories, but some of the stories are a little racy, and they did not like the fact that I chose that type of story. I will share really quickly the story. The curator from a very large museum who runs the whole museum said that he wanted to share his story, but I couldn't use his name, and he's someone famous. So I said, that's fine. That's, but he goes, you have my total permission to use the story. And that is, there was always this guard who was very dreamy, this beautiful guard who worked at the museum. And one day, before they opened up the museum, as they were going through the rooms to open up the museum to the public, they caught this guard and the manager of the gift shop having sex on the bed in one of the period rooms. This led to a meeting with HR and discipline actions, with the HR head saying that everyone who works at the museum has a handbook that clearly states you're not to touch any of the artwork. So she goes, I sure as hell know you're not allowed to have sex on them. I'll leave the story there, but those are the type of stories where people said, oh my God, I got a great story. This happened here. There was this crime here. And then later, after the book comes out, they said, oh my God, you really ran that story. Yes, I was thinking about using the story. Yes. And they said, well, I didn't think you were going to use it. So we found this in your brain. This is my doctor. You do not make much money as a cartoonist. So what I did was I started adding people in my cartoons. And I think in this case, I got a free MRI from it. Like, I actually paid some of my bills with cartoons by including them, as long as they showed up in the New Yorker. And there's been a few doctors in the New Yorker who are my personal doctors, and they would help me out knowing that it was such a struggle. So, just leave it at that. That's one of the things I also did to make extra money is I do covers. And I was an editor for a series of books in which I was the editor at Princeton Architectural Press. And this is Sam Gross. He was my closest friend, I would say, who brought me into the New Yorker. He just passed away. But he's the person who dared me to try cartooning. I was an art director for a publishing house for a while, because my wife and I had lost our savings. We were caretaking her parents. And a long story, we wound up having to spend a fortune unexpectedly. And quickly, it was all hands on deck. It wasn't a question of me doing another bookstore book. Books do not make money that fast or at all at times. So I took a real job working at a publishing house for a short time. And this is a person who I really admire, Jack Handy, who's the New York Times calls our funniest humorist of our generation, and working with him is a lot of fun. And I realize now I'm supposed to be doing the cover for his next book, and I'm late. I'm going to quickly share a couple of covers. This is the cover of the book of why I made The Office. This is the book, The Sea Below Us. I did multiple covers. When I do any of the covers for my book, I'll do like about 30 or 35 covers and lay them all out and think about, I'm walking through the store. I have 5-second glance. Which cover is the most effective? And this book has not been published yet, but I am so into the book and The Office that I don't know if I'll write it. I think I'll just let it be an office and some nice covers. And The Elements of Stress was actually a self-published book. So I've gone from Penguin Random House, Simon Schuster, WW, Norton, and all the other publishers. Then I've also worked for mid-sized places like Globe and Princeton Architectural Press. And I've also did some self-publishing. So I kind of have a feeling of what's the speed bumps in all those different avenues you could go down. I kind of have a sense of what the strengths are and what's the reasons why you would want to do one over the other. And well, I'm going to finish up here so we could talk about that. One thing I'll do is I'm going to share this code. If you want to get my newsletter, I'll give you a paid subscription for free. If you sign up, I'll know it's you from today, and I'll upgrade you. You don't have to pay anything. I'll just know to upgrade you. But if you want to take a chance to scan that, and then I'm going to, great. So one thing I was going to say was from the Element to Stress book, this was an example of different marketing ideas. This is the stress ball that I had made done.
Oh, nice.
So we're trying to think of like how to do tie-ins with the different books, how I could sort of like see a unique path. Like I showed the poster earlier, things like that.
Someone asked, is it possible to buy the poster?
I have some copies. I wasn't selling it. I was just giving it to bookstores, but I do have copies. I'll say this, if it's a, and I guess it's like 2.5 feet by 3 feet. If someone wants to write to me, if they buy any of my books, as a thank you, I'll ship them a poster.
That is very kind offer.
Okay.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. So I do have a few questions, and then we'll go to the audience Q&A. We've already got a few in the hopper. We were talking, before we officially started about how much more challenging it is today to get media attention for a book. So can you describe the difference between when you first started putting out books and today, how the media has worked?
Jane, it worries me when you say you have some questions. You sound like my mom when she has some concerns. Anytime I announce I'm on to some new project, she goes, I have some questions. And it gets worse before it gets better. When it comes to publicity and marketing, it's the same as true with publishing, unfortunately. It is never been easier to publish a book, but it's never been more difficult to make a living from publishing, I think, now. When I first came out with the Snowman book in 2007, I did about 150 TV and radio interviews.
150.
There were times in which I remember one day I did 10 in one day, where they just had you on for like 15 minutes, and it would be a radio show in England or Ireland. And the worst would be if a Scottish radio station wanted you on, I would go on. They would say, 1, 2, 5, you're on. And I would be on for 10 minutes, and I couldn't understand one question. Their dialect was so heavy, I was totally lost. And I did do TV, but those days of getting on TV now is just not possible. I have tried to get on now. I did one show on PBS recently, but that's really hard with the election year and with so many books. I mean, Ernest Hemingway, when he came out with a book, there was not 4 million books coming out the same year.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're competing with. I remember even when I did book events, the people would come out in droves. My first book event was in New York City, Barnes and Noble at Lincoln Center. It was standing room only. I think we sold a lot. We had like 300 people, and people were there to celebrate books. They went to Barnes and Noble all the time. Barnes and Noble doesn't even exist there anymore. It's either, I'm sure, a bank or it's probably a bank. That's what we're competing with. At that time, I would say that independent bookstores represented, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, I'm just guesstimating, but they represented about 35% of book sales. And I would say now it's like more like less than 10%.
Now it's definitely less than 10. I think it's maybe 5 or 6. I don't know what it was in the 2000s, but I know that Barnes and Noble took away quite a bit of their market share. That was their
Yeah.
heyday. And
But
they,
what I try to do is I try to make my books a very tactile experience in which you do not want to buy it online with an ebook, but you want to have it in your hands. The bookstore book, the big selling point about that book, aside from the fact that it's in bookstores because they want to say they're in the book,
yeah.
is that it opens like a garage door. The cover opens up differently. In each case, I try to make my book feel like, oh, I haven't seen this before. This is a new experience for me,
Yeah.
and not one that I can get from an ebook.
There's a question from Michael that actually ties into something that we discussed briefly before starting. He says it appears you have multiple projects going on at a time, and I know that's true. And he says, here's the Goldilocks question: how many are too many, too few, just right?
Well, that's a question for each person. You have to enjoy what you're doing. Everyone has their own limits. Everyone has to know where their point is to say no to things. It's I keep going back to Jane's workshop, but it just so happens by coincidence you're hitting on some themes. And one was to set boundaries of when you work and when you stop. You have a weekend, you make sure that you don't have everything spill over and do things. In my case, I'm a little bit of a workaholic and I work until very late. I do wake up around 5:30 in the morning to write. I do like a short story, I do some writing before all the emails come in and before I get totally bombarded by 9 o'clock. By 9, 10 o'clock, I have phone calls and it's very hard for me to work. So I work very early in the morning. One of the biggest lessons I learned was from this writer who, I'm not going to say she's a friend. She's a frenemy. Yeah.
Frenemy.
She's definitely, yeah. She was doing all this work. She's cranking out books. And I was saying to myself, how is it that you can get so much done? And she just said, no TV. She has no TV. Now, I have podcasts and I listen to podcasts in the background, but there's never a time that I'm sitting watching a TV and not doing something.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'm signing copies of something or doing something, drawing of something. But this job demands a lot. You do have to do a lot just to squeak by. It isn't easy, and it is for the faint of heart. It's tricky. So at what point do you say it's too many projects? At some point, you have to say what projects mean the most to you. And the one big lesson is you have to stop chasing money because there's not a lot of money anywhere. So you might as well do what you love doing and understand that your best work is going to come from the work that you're most passionate from. You have to feel it to really do a good job. I mean, there's times in which I work for people who I'm sorry and I regret saying yes to a project. And my work looks like it. It reflects it that I didn't want to do the project.
Yeah. Michael also asks about your initial career success and denial rates of submitting to various publications.
You have seen in my little show condensed best hits. Those are my greatest hits. What I'm not sharing with you is all the years of people rejecting me and saying that I wanted to do this and nobody loves it, or wanting to say, oh, forget it, I'm going to become a rodeo clown. It's over. So we're just sharing the good points, but this is something that happens with everyone. And I wish that everyone would see this with even the best writers. There's no such thing as an overnight success. And I did have luck. There were times in which I got breaks, like with the New Yorker cartoon. I sold a cartoon right away, but that didn't really mean anything besides getting published the first try out. And now I'm not even getting sold at all. So who got the last laugh? It's just the way it is. I think that you have to learn to, again, stay in your lane and really understand that if you compare yourself to what could have been and what it should be, and why am I not doing as well as Sarah Porter, who I went to high school with, and I make up the name, but I'm just saying, everyone has got that person in their head that's saying, well, how come I don't have the 3 yachts? You could drive yourself crazy. Well, you have to find happiness. You have to just find what makes you happy. And then you see what happens. And then if the chips fall in a certain way, that's great. And so when I take on a lot of projects, because I feel like too, it increases my chances that one of them will see the finish line. A lot of times these projects don't. I want to share one quick story. I was hired to illustrate a book called How to Become a Bestseller. And this guy paid me in advance. We had an argument. He wanted to pay me royalties. And I said, I wanted to pay in advance. And good thing, because he never even got the book published. He wrote a book, How to Be a Bestseller, and couldn't even get an agent. You just never know.
So one more question from Michael. He says, humor is subjective, and what I think is funny, my wife doesn't. So what's your review process to determine what to keep or toss? Is it just you? Is it your wife, editor, fans?
My wife is very critical. When I
Okay.
show her my cartoons, she always says, not funny. She is brutal. My advice to people out there is, if you have a manuscript or cartoons, do not send them to my wife. You will not get any satisfaction. Knowing what's funny or what reads right when you're writing, if you're writing a chapter, ultimately it's got to be you, and you've got to learn how to have a good eye, a good ear, and a good eye. And that's something to learn. It's all about decisions. People often say, oh, you're so lucky, you're gifted, you could draw, you could paint. No, it's actually just a series of decisions. It's a question of me knowing when I do something, is that good, leave it, or move on and change it. And same thing with writing. It's like, do I make the change? What point is it good? I know people who make bad decisions. They're talented, but they do not have a good eye or a good ear. That's something you have to develop yourself. Only you know what's the best thing that you're trying to do and what voice you're trying to share. So it's not something anyone else is going to know.
A more technical question from Janice. How do you lay down your text on the illustrations? She says, I'm a graphic novelist, and I love how you've incorporated the text with that art.
Well, thanks. The way that's done is the artwork is one file, and then I add a layer and I draw over it with hand using a Wacom tablet and a pen. And I write the text, send that to the publisher. They're going to proofread it. There's always changes to be made. And now that it's a separate layer, I can make some changes and some edits. And I'm only changing the layer with the text. But everyone's going to find their own way. The best thing to do is to just do what's best with you, messing around with what works. There isn't a right way. There's a right way only for what you do. And in your case, if you're doing graphic novels, you might find that, there's all different ways to get to the finish line. Maybe the way I just explained might be best for you. But I will say the text begins on a Word document. Everything is written first. You're not writing it on the artwork. You have something set in mind to place on top of the artwork. And I always try to condense and do everything succinct and try to cut down the words as much as possible, which is what you see in the cartoons. I try to make the captions as short as possible, or ideally do a cartoon that doesn't even require a caption.
Pat is wondering if you've thought of going on LinkedIn and presenting at libraries. I'm not quite sure how LinkedIn and libraries are connected. Maybe there's something there I don't know about. But then she continues to say, Minneapolis has art fairs and a popular state fair with TV stations who walk the grounds, who might televise you and your work. They also have book fairs, et cetera. So I think she's throwing out some ideas for you to maybe earn some more money or visibility. Do you
No,
do
thanks.
do you do library talks or events?
I just did a library event a couple of days ago for the area of Massachusetts, and it was really a lot of fun. And I thought it went okay. We had a little technical problem. They maxed out at 500 people, and as a result, on their end, they crashed like 4 times because of the bandwidth. But
Oh,
I was very
goodness.
flattered, and people were so gracious. I mean, when people were writing the comments and stuff, in that case, I don't know if people are going to like my stuff. I was showing the show. I can't tell if people thought a cartoon was funny or not. I'm just kind of hoping that when we finish and we look at the chat, that people thought that it was funny. But I'm insecure. I don't know if what's what. And I even forgot what the question, but I want to thank you for the suggestions. Maybe I'll go out to Minneapolis. It sounds like that's where it's happening, not here.
Well, I know the state fairs in the Midwest are fabulous. I don't know if you've ever been to one, but they do have a very special
Oh
quality
my
to them.
God, of course. No, in order of things I do, as soon as I get there, I get a potato pancake and a funnel cake. This way, my stomach is unsettled for the rest of the afternoon. As the heat beats down, I'm thinking of ways of an escape route. I can't think of a country fair I went to where I didn't get violently ill by the end of the evening because I just overeat. I have I cannot help myself. I love fairs.
The state fair in Indiana was famous for having a fried brain sandwich, which was always the talk of the fair, which I never tried. No regrets. Okay, so Annette wonders, did you or do you find it harder to sell humor these days? And
Absolutely.
yeah, okay, so that comes to our follow-up question from Annette, advice on your approach to targeting your audience or publishers given the difficulty.
Well, there's trends. And when I read the hot sheet religiously, I see all these different trends happening. That doesn't mean that you stop doing what you love doing. There's always the exception. There's always room for people to succeed. Trends are just that, though. But there is a trend that humor is doing really badly because so many cartoon books that came out recently are really bad. There's been some really bad books, and it really hurt the field. And on top of it, there's other things that are doing better. That are getting people's attention, like romance fantasy. And in the same token, I think that children's books are not doing as well. Now, if you have a great children's book in you and you're thinking about going to a pitch slam, by all means, do not let any of this affect you. You are going full steam ahead and doing what you should do. But I don't think about what trends are doing bad or good when I try to come up with my next book idea. A lot of times it's other reasons that are always different. Maybe friends want a book. The bookstore book that I did, after that, the next book was a thank you for making that book a New York Times bestseller. And I did a collection of cartoons only about bookstores. And it was my way of saying thank you. And that book was a small print run. It wasn't a big advance. It was solely as a thank you.
Yeah.
So the reasons always are different. With the museum book, I wanted to do it for some selfish reasons. I wanted to go see great art for 2 years and at the same time help museums. So it was a multi-factor. And I do hope there's a sequel because there are so many more museums to go to. And I felt bad that some museums were left out. And I know some museums felt slighted.
Yeah. Well, it occurs to me that I mean, you may not have really intended it this way, but it worked out this way, that there's really a nice built-in retail distribution with both of those books. Obviously, a book about bookstores is probably going to get really good sales at bookstores. Museum stores sell tons of books. And so that does give you like this nice built-in foundation that the publisher can have some confidence that, oh yeah, the bookstores or museums featured are going to be stocking the book.
Yeah, that's interesting. The way you're saying that, I want to give an answer that sounds like I'm a hypocrite, because what I want to say is you can't work in a vacuum. You do want to communicate and fill a need. And it's not because I'm taking advantage of the fact that the bookstores are there, as much as you have to realize what they need too.
Yeah.
I know some people talk about projects they want to do, and I'm thinking, but no one really wants to read about, your cat's memoir. That's too specific an area.
Yeah.
Maybe we could expand that and say, look, you can do a cookbook for cats. Now you're talking, something bigger. So you have to think in terms sometimes of what the market dictates within reason.
Yeah. Within reason. That's key.
Within reason. One thing I don't like is when I see people doing books, I get a lot of books to blurb and review and stuff that sound alike.
Mm.
The people are obviously taking the same sort of classes and they're learning the same things. It's showing up in the work, because so much of the work is so similar. And the one thing I would say to that is, as someone who, again, I've been to more workshops than anyone, because that's where I work, drawing the live drawing, is that you take what you want from it, you find what's applies to you. It's not the whole thing. It's what specifically has to do with your work.
Yeah, that's very wise, because some people feel like they have to follow everything that's said, and that's not the case.
Yeah,
okay.
Like McSweeney's, every title's like the same. There's a redundance.
Yeah. Okay, we've hit our time. I just have one final question. This actually comes from the chat. People are wondering if there's yet a compilation of all of your cartoons.
The Element of Stress is very inexpensive. It's a $10 book, and that has quite a bit of my cartoons.
Okay.
The other cartoon books have sold out, but that book has about, I guess, like 50 cartoons in it. And the best thing to do is, for free, you could just follow me on my newsletter. I share my cartoons there. The Bob is a Substack. And then you could just, check in on me every so often. I kind of like the idea of people trying to communicate with me. If you have questions I didn't answer here, please, you could contact me there and we could continue the conversation. Because I feel like that's part of us all supporting each other, is like, keeping the communication, asking questions. And I'm learning as well. I'm learning every time I do this, even though I did all the talking. I sound like a blabbermouth, but I'm going to learn something from this. I'll take away something.
Yeah, absolutely. Bob, this has been a delight. I really appreciate you spending this time with me and the folks who have attended. So please do subscribe to his newsletter and stay in touch with him and his new projects and books. It's going to be fun. I can feel it. All right. Thank you, Bob. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and I hope to see you again soon.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.